Hey,
How's it going?
good. I am trying to figure out how I can mute the sounds for the chat. So,
I think that you have to be the showrunner to do that.
oh no, I meant like the Google chat.
Oh,
Um,
I sometimes will shut out of like literally log out of my calendar and chat, but
oh,
I
here
don't
we
know that it
go.
always works.
There we go. No sounds. Okay, got it. Okay,
Hmm.
I figured it out.
And do you have where's the final PowerPoint? Did
It
you re-upload it to the folder?
yeah, it's in the folder. Um, I can chat you the link so it's not in the actual chat. Uh,
Cool. Did you create this in PowerPoint or in Google?
in Google, I just changed so I just made a copy of your presentation, kept all the formats the same, and just changed like the text in the boxes.
Um, is this the one that Bethany edited?
Should be. That's the one I was working in.
Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. I thought she adjusted the front picture. I don't think I've ever presented from, I'm just going to download it and do it that way because I don't think I've
Okay.
ever presented from
From Google.
slides. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll fuck it up if I don't.
Yeah.
All dog, new tricks. There's a saying about that, I believe.
Yeah. When it's crunch time, always go with what you know. I never want to do stuff on the fly because I'm like, this is the one time where I need this to work, and I know it's not gonna. So,
Yeah, exactly. And I'm gonna set up like what I did before, which was like set up a blocked half hour before for our meetings and a half hour after in case there's any like post follow-up that needs to happen. Not that I want to sign up to always do the pre and post, but just sort of like I think it's also just a good thing to like have a little space to if
yeah, work block it out for
yep.
sure. Hello.
Hey Jessica.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good.
Good.
Second to figure out my video situation.
No rush. You
We're
are
sort of in
the
the same
first one
place.
here, so
Well, that was easy.
FYF, what's that?
Stands for First 5 Years Fund. So we do advocacy at the federal level for kids birth through 5.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Is this your first fundraising Friday?
I was just invited to the Resilience Initiative like a week ago. So I have been signing up for a bunch of things, and this is my first.
Woohoo! Well, that means you have to talk a lot.
Yeesh. I like to observe.
Hi, Trish.
Good
Hey, Jen.
morning. Hi.
I don't know about y'all, but like Fridays are coming on quick for me. I feel like it was just Monday. I don't know how it happened.
I feel like Monday and Tuesday go so slowly, and then all of a sudden Friday's here. It's like, oh crap, but then Monday's right around the corner again.
This year has been a blur. I have no idea how it's May already.
Where are you guys, Polly and Kafele? Is that how you say your name?
Kafili. I'm in Dallas.
You're in Dallas, and Polly, where are you?
BC.
Oh, okay. So Polly, you're experiencing our interesting weather. We can't decide if it's winter or summer.
I mean, it's sort of typical. I grew up in Baltimore for like this area, but it is, I had woke up with a migraine, and I think it's because like it's a very often,
Sure.
yeah, it's often affected by like crazy weather patterns too.
Yes,
So I'm just like, not only is it Friday, but like my brain is like, shut down now.
Keely, what's it like in Dallas? Is it crazy hot?
The weather is just now finally breaking.
Okay.
So really nice. It's like mid to high 80s today, and it's gonna be
Ooh,
yeah
that's
in the
cool.
80s or 90s
Okay.
for the next week. So I'll enjoy this before it's like 100 for the entire summer straight.
And do you guys have a bad humidity in Dallas?
It wasn't bad originally. It was like really dry, but climate change. I've been here 6 years. And the climate has definitely changed a lot since I've been here. So now it can get a little bit sticky, but we're still not as bad as Houston. So
Okay.
small wins.
Nice. I feel like we, Polly, you have a great representation across the country here, because I'm in California. I'm in technically Burbank, but LA County. So, got nice representation from coast to coast and everything in between.
Nice. How is the weather over there?
It's actually, I love it. I mean, we moved from the Midwest, and so I miss weather. And it's actually raining right now, which is awesome. We've had I'm sure you've heard, like, significant historic amounts of rain in the last couple of months. So I'm really enjoying it before it gets to the summer, and then it's like 90, 100-degree days. So yeah, all good.
We're almost at the 5-minute mark. Kafili, are you ready for me to share this deck?
Yeah. Let's get started, and then as people hop in, we can take it from there.
All right.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Kafili Thomas. I am the Director of Program Learning at Progressive Multiplier. And today we'll be talking about how to use your metrics to do next level work. Before we get started, if we wanted to do some introductions in the chat, it would be great to know who's in the room. So name, pronouns, and the org that you're joining from, that'd be great. This is the entire Progressive Multiplier team, as Polly likes to say, small but mighty, and growing. So you'll see not only Polly and I on these trainings, but oftentimes some of our other team members will stop in and provide support. So yeah, we'll be familiar faces for all the sessions that you join. You can always reach out to us directly. And so a little bit about Progressive Multiplier Fund. Our whole ethos is to help organizations build a progressive movement of, by, and for everyday people. We do this by organizing and leveraging funding to create on-ramps for progressive organizations to start, strengthen, or scale individual giving and earn revenue programs. through both, oh, good. That's fine. Through both an online community of practice and grant making and support. And we have three main buckets of work of where we make grants to. The first one is our Achieving Justice program. Then we have Realizing Democracy and Restoring Environment. These are our three focus areas. As of right now, we also have some general operating support grants that we do offer as well. And wanted to give a big shout out to our partner, Resilience Initiative, who is supporting these trainings. So yeah. You can also find recordings of this and other fundraising Fridays that we have done at the link below. Polly, I'm sure you can put that in the chat at some point for people to check back in. So these are all recorded. You can also share with your teams afterwards or have them just to refer back to. And so what is available through the partnership that we have with the Resilience Initiative? So we provide one-on-one fundraising coaching to members of this initiative. So individual coaching, consulting, and deliverable preparation. Things that we've worked on in the past are board fundraising trainings, annual development plan presentations, end of year giving, marketing and fundraising calendars, major gift training, and others, as well as these fundraising Fridays. So we have 2 tracks this year. The first one is building on some of our fundraising fundamentals, our 101 track, if you will. And then our 201 track is really looking at some of the current trends and next level topics that are emerging in our field. So trying to stay, like both give a foundational support, but also staying relevant to the emerging needs in philanthropy and fundraising. You can sign up for your one-on-one coaching at the link below. It's a quick little Google form, or reach out to Michelle Mengel if you have any questions about signing up. And as we said before, if you need to look at some of the past sessions or see what those offerings are, you can always go to our private YouTube channel where all of these are recorded. Great. So we have some topics for today. Numbers, who needs them? Numerical narrative, all data ain't good data. From spreadsheets to success, a case study about what data-driven progress could look like for you and your org, and some emerging tools and trends to refer to. All right, so let's just talk about numbers and metrics in general, and why being a data-driven organization is more and more important. Firstly, standing out from the crowd from a fundraising perspective is going to make all the difference. Funders are more selective than they've ever been. There are over 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States. And I think this number was as of 2021, so even more now. And we've seen just an incredible growth, especially at the small grassroots level of organizations post 2020. So competition for donor dollars at that level and size of organization is higher than it's ever been before. But there are also more donors than there have ever been, and they're paying more attention to their charitable lives. We're seeing a shift away from the type of donor who just sends their annual check, at the end of the year for the tax write-off to the same org that they've done for the last 20 years or where their parents gave, and seeing, especially in younger and younger generations, a real desire to get involved in the nitty-gritty details of the organizations that they support and are making conscious decisions between them and where they can send their dollars. So with more donors in the field, there is a heightened opportunity for you to grow your donor base, but only if you can be found and prove value of what you're doing with the funding. So just wanted to see from y'all's perspective, are you finding it harder to stand out today, to engage with new donors, or how are you finding new donor acquisition? And you can answer either in the chat or feel free to come off mute.
I know that I'm hearing from grantees that they're seeing an increase of number of donors, but it seems like donation sizes went down last year, though some are saying that they're seeing a little bit of an uptick in size this year. So I'm also curious about what folks are experiencing on the ground. Anybody feel like sharing or even have anything that they've noticed so far?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll say, we're a small pooled philanthropic fund. So we've basically had the same funders since the beginning, and we don't actively solicit individual donations. But we certainly have seen smaller commitments over the last few years. But in all fairness, when stocks are selling well, or whatever the case may be, the donations go back up. And then we're also seeing a little bit of a movement. All of our funds right now are unrestricted. And we're seeing a little movement away from that to more project specific grants, which I feel like is antithetical to what I'm hearing from a lot of other nonprofits and from a lot of funders themselves. Like the shift to general support is growing, but we're kind of seeing the reverse. And I'm not exactly sure why that is.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Oftentimes the argument between project-based grants is, again, numbers and metrics. They're easier to track. You can understand impact better. And for certain types of donors, they really want to see that, quote unquote, that their money is being used in a way that they can understand. And numbers are the easiest way for them to do that oftentimes.
Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind jumping in here, I see that you said that you're having trouble getting new project funding, and I definitely can understand that. It's just so hard whenever you're trying to launch a new project to get folks to pay attention. Everyone wants that track record, but nobody wants to fund to create the track record. Is that what you're experiencing, or do you think it's something else?
I think it is part of they want that track record, and so we know that we have to start out a project, but that's the hard part, right? If you don't have funding for that project, what do you do? So that's kind of what we're struggling with, and in hopes that we will attract the funding. So we've noticed that for projects that are going really well, that's attracting funding, and that's great. But then we can't do these other projects until we get ahead, and then people, funders will be like, "Oh, this is great." Yeah.
Yeah, that's always been difficult, finding that startup and seed funding, and those unrestricted dollars are so crucial for that. That's a big part of why PM really uplifts independent revenue generation, because the unrestricted nature of those dollars allows you to be a lot more flexible for like new projects starting, whereas going to traditional institutional routes can be a little bit trickier to get that buy-in, to get that investment. Great. So let's talk about impact and data's relation to it. Metrics gives your organization an opportunity to show your impact. As we were just talking about before, donors are really familiar with direct service organizations and how to measure impact that way. I always give the example of the Feed the Children model, which is incredibly successful. $1 a day feeds a child. We've all seen those commercials, but what that does is put the level of impact of the gift directly into the donor's head, and it makes you as a donor imagine giving that money directly to the service that is being provided. So it creates that emotional link between you and the constituency group of the organization that you're donating to. Advocacy is a lot harder. Progressive movement funding is a lot harder because the abstract nature of that, the delayed big win that we often see, whether we're going towards a policy change or some sort of systemic change, you know, we don't necessarily have that easy number that we can point to or impact measure that we can point to that translates to donors in easily digestible ways. So it's ever more important that we think deeply about how we talk about our work and how we track our work, so we're able to still make those types of connections. Have you all seen any difficulty about pitching some of that advocacy-based work to individual donors, especially ones who are like maybe less familiar or outside of your base?
I would say for sure, because all we do here at FFIF is federal advocacy, which, as you all know, is very slow. So you don't see progress quite as quickly as I think many donors would hope. So it certainly is a challenge.
It
I think
totally.
you also get that in the arts and culture realm where you know, people see the value of it, but maybe not as much as, you know, kind of as you were just saying, feed the child or help the homeless. You know, those seem to be elevated, and rightly so, right, to the real concerns of people today. But when you work at, you know, a museum or a theater or the symphony, it you know, you're doing also equally good work for mental health of people, and it's just hard to kind of explain that to people, and especially millennials. I mean, I think the museums and the symphonies and the theaters tend to have a skew a larger, an older donor base, right? And how do we really start trying to attract that millennial donor base? That's what we struggle with.
We have a hand up, Rachel.
Hi there. Sorry, my internet is a little slow, so I'm off camera, but I think that this is a really important question. So thank you for asking it. Texas Freedom Network is a state-based advocacy organization. We have a C3 and a C4. And I mean, we're in this for the long term, and we're doing long-term culture change work, which obviously doesn't happen overnight. And I think that that was part of us internally establishing metrics and evaluations to figure out what is the messaging that we talk to, you know, kind of the inside baseball folks and then the larger audiences. But just wanted to kind of give one example. We work a lot with faith communities, progressive faith communities, and we do reproductive freedom work in congregations across the state. And it's a very slow process. And so I think that we can all set goals and metrics with funders as well as internally, but I also think it's important that we're just realistic and saying to those funders, hey, listen, this year, for example, TFN, we talked to 150 different congregations, but only 12 of them actually became, you know, members of our reproductive freedom initiative. But we talked to 150 congregations. That was thousands of people who were talking about abortion out loud services in their religious institution. So I think it's just one of those conversations that you have to have about the metrics that the funder wants, or the data that the funder wants, but also the messaging that can help tell that story and the long-term impact of our work, which I just think is always so hard in the advocacy space. Thank you.
Yeah,
100%.
Rachel, I'd love to just sort of jump in on that. What I find interesting about that, and I often wish that organizers and advocacy program would do what development does, and this is a great opportunity for you, is to talk about those in the same way that we would talk about like the KPIs of fundraising, right? We had to reach this many people to get this many conversions. So then you can, and by using some of the data, like it, you know, we had to talk to 150 congregations of X many number of people, you know, X number of people per congregation, you can, you know, guesstimate it, to be able to get a win, you know, to get somebody to a congregation to affiliate to, or to you know, whatever the action is, depending on your organization, right? So then you can then say, like, it's always hard for us to track how long it's going to take to make this change. But what we can tell you is this is how much effort it takes to convert one group, one person, we have to talk to 100. Just like when you're creating your donor pyramid, you've got to talk to X number of prospects to convert one donor, right? So, you know, I think there's some really good info there that you could use to sort of like show advocacy, how to frame that from a metrics and data standpoint. Kafili, what do you think?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that goes directly into our next point about metrics giving you internal benchmarks, right? So your mission is your organizational North Star and your metrics are your roadmap. Rachel, so for your organization, if you have that ratio of organizations spoken to like organizations that are now within the fold, that's your conversion rate. And so next year, you can look at that conversion rate and see whether you are more efficient, less efficient. That measures impact, that measures growth, that measures effectiveness of your organization. You can take that information back to a funder and justify further investment. If you say, you know, our conversion rate of acceptance into our programming increased by 20 to 30% last year. In real terms, that might only be 4 to 5 more groups than you added the year before, but you can make that argument with the data that you now have. So it's not only anecdotal or narrative-based data, but having the numbers and the statistics to be able to back that up always helps your argument. So are there other examples of organizations who have tried to map some of their organizational goals to metrics, and whether it's been successful or you're having difficulty trying to figure out what that looks like for your organization?
This is Sarah. I work with Repower Fund, and we're a national training and capacity building organization. I think we're struggling on a couple different fronts. Like, we don't have clear and consistent metrics across all of our training programs and our 5 different program areas. And I'm really eager to like get to some of those that can cross-cut our different training programs. And so what I find myself saying a lot of times is just very output stuff. Like, we trained 3,500 people and 80% said that they would recommend us to someone else. And those aren't particularly meaningful to me. And it's also hard because we play this sort of like intermediary role. Like, did this person win their campaign because they were trained by us? Maybe, but we don't want to take credit for that. And similarly with like a lot of the wins we've seen over the past couple of years, like, we work with a lot of groups in Georgia. Is all the great stuff that's happened in Georgia because of us? No, but how do we sort of thoughtfully lift up the work that we're doing there without taking credit for the folks who are on the front lines, actually like registering the voters or passing the policy, et cetera, et cetera.
100%. We'll actually get into like different types of metrics later on in this training that I think would be really helpful for the deeper levels of measurement that I think you're asking for your organization. But I think that's a worthwhile conversation. You know, organizations of all types are technically intermediaries, right? So if we receive funding and do programming to help support people across whatever focus area, eventually, like, we are at some stage removed from the work. So there's just a level of comfortability of like taking credit or recognizing your impact without overstepping bounds. And I think that is a delicate dance that all organizations have to do, but definitely something that with some organizational frameworks and some tighter metrics that are being tracked and understanding how your impact as an org feeds up the ladder of like where you want to get to with your mission, you'll be able to realistically track those in ways that seem ethical and also effective. I think we had Trish reply. Oh, okay. That was a message for connection. Oh, great. Yes, this is a cross-learning space too. So please feel free, take down each other's information, continue to do some cross-learning outside of these meetings. This is what they're for. So very happy to see that.
And and let us know when connections have been made and they've been fruitful, because we love to be able to share with our partners when stuff like that happens.
Definitely. Great. So let's talk about how numbers can help you tell your story, which is what we were kind of leading into. And so the argument that we're trying to make during this presentation is that numbers make your word strong. Data is your research. All of us have written research papers before. You know, you need your works cited page. You can't just say things without any research, any backing. You know, that's an incomplete paper, right? But in our world, we often put numbers and words in two totally different categories. You know, whether it's finance, whether it's fundraising, whether it's metrics, those live in one space, and the storytelling and the programming and the narrative live in another space, when they really should be wedded together. We are, through our education system, educated to believe numbers and to trust in them. Numbers give us the frameworks and understanding that what we're seeing in the world with our eyes is actually the truth of the world, right? So we should be able to use those to help back up what we know to be true anecdotally. This is helpful internally when we want to measure our impact and whether we're doing the work that we want to do successfully, but also talking about it externally to donors, to the general public, to the media, whoever, about our scale, our impact, and our importance in the world. So getting into scale and scope, numbers will allow you to highlight how big the problem you're trying to solve is, and also why you are the best suited organization to solve it. You know, a lot of the issues that we focus on are really large, well-known issues, but kind of abstract to the general public. You know, we are experts in our own focus areas, and so we take for granted how little of the knowledge that we know actually permeates to the general public, even around things like climate crisis, homelessness, racism, sexism, things that are prevalent in our society and have been for decades. So being able to use those numbers at scale really helps you highlight how pervasive the issues that you're working on are, and also how well your organization has been at combating those. So just in general, I know we talked about this really base form of metrics that people are familiar with, which are these type of metrics. What kind of numbers do you use or metrics when you normally talk about your work?
Are folks using like a number of people served or number of people reached? Or or do you feel like numbers are so squishy with the work that you do that you don't even talk numbers?
Hi, this is Trish. I work for Early Edge. We're a statewide advocacy organization focused on early childhood ed. And so we use it kind of in both ways. We sort of have, you know, there's data and research around childcare deserts. So we're able to say, you know, there's a third of children age 0 to 5 in LA County who don't have access to high quality early learning. But then we also, you know, flip it, and with any sort of, you know, milestones or accomplishments that we meet, we're then able to say, and through this legislation that was just passed, you know, an additional 22,000 children across the state now have access to this program. So we kind of use it in both ways.
Great. That's awesome.
We use a lot of data as well, as far as people's, you know, children served, where we do outreach programs in the community, how many field trips come into the museum, how many members we have. But then you start wondering, is that just a bunch of noise? Like, are people really listening, or is it more about, you know, their affinity to your mission, or it's an interesting question. I'm not, you know, people throw numbers around all the time. And, you know, I know we do a lot of marketing and we have different marketing pieces. And somebody came to me and said, oh, well, these numbers are now last year's numbers. We need to update all these marketing materials. And I was thinking, well, would anybody even notice if I reprinted all of these marketing materials to say that we served, as opposed to 8,437 students, it's now 9,614. Does it, you know, does anybody have an opinion about that?
I also work for a museum, and we do so much work in our community that is about educational equity, really, at the end of the day, and making science education and environmental programs available. And I think the thing about metrics in certain populations is not just providing the numbers, but providing that impact story, and how to do that with a concise messaging that is, kind of beyond bullet points, because that isn't sufficient for this type of work. But how do we build creative tools that provide the combination of metrics and impact? And I'm looking for new ways to language some of that, because it is part of the changing landscape of the work that we do. So thanks for bringing that up.
That, we did a fundraising Friday of last season about reporting, and one of the things that we talked about was like how to display numbers, and I can't help but think that like there are some numbers that just like you're talking about, that you share annually, that like are meaningful on some level, but they're not the heartstring things. And for me, like, I try to put myself in your shoes. Like I would think like, well, maybe this would be like the ubiquitous like growth graph, or the, whatever the graph looks like, so you're continuing to show those numbers. But I agree with Kirsten here, like that the numbers need to, you need to sort of pair the who gives a shit part of the numbers with with a little bit of a story. Or if there's like, here's the chart of like how many folks have come in and out, but maybe there's like even a pull out of that to say like, of this information, we know that this has impacted students in this way because you've started asking different questions, maybe in the follow-up. Or we've got this story from a parent who talks about their kid, how, being in touch, going to this museum had helped them see their kids see things differently, and now they're behaving differently, or whatever, trying to like link something anecdotal. There's so many times where I've been in front of, done presentations or done one-to-one with donors, and I'll tell a story and you can tell that they're all like emotional about the story. But if I mention a statistic, they'll come back and be like, oh, what was that number again? And it was like, you were way more moved by the story. Why are you trying to get the exact number right for this conversation? But it just always tells me that like, for some reason, like numbers give credence, just like Kafili said, we're conditioned to believe the numbers, but connecting it to the heart is where that's where our jobs really come into play. And also like mixing qual numbers with quant numbers.
Mhm.
Well, that's why I feel like in really at the end of the day, and I, from public television to social justice, like all the different, worlds that I've done this work in, that really with the numbers, I'm trying to get my team to metabolize them, because what data can do at the end of the day is it really empowers us to talk about our work, whether it's you're the marketing person or you're the ED. Good data is vital, not just because we're sharing it, but because of how we metabolize it and how that empowers us in whatever facet of the work that we're doing at our teams.
100%. So like what we're talking about now is like not only the tracking of metrics, but like the expression of it and the messaging behind it and making them useful towards your larger goal. So Trish, you said you're in Los Angeles, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right. And you said like the legislation you passed affected like 22,000 children, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So I just did a quick Google. The former Staples Center Crypto.com arena seats only 20,000 people. So like even a message around, this affected enough kids to overfill Staples Center is something that everybody in Los Angeles would like be able to put a mental picture to.
Wow.
Where 22,000 kids in your mind, you're like, it's 22,000 kids. But imagine like a packed Lakers game and more people, 2,000 kids still outside. That's how many kids are going to be affected by the legislation that you passed, right? So being able to attach those numbers to like real life that matters to whoever you're talking to is like the point of this, right?
It's
Um,
amazing. Thank you for
so
that.
yeah, no worries. So like going into our next point, like that is something that's incredibly important for organizations who work on long-term growth and funding patterns, because it's hard to tell, like before we get that big win, before that legislation passes, before the systemic change that we've worked 5-10 years on becomes a reality, how we measure progress in the interim, how much closer are we to that big win than we were before. But being able to show that really highlights your organizational growth and strength. So you don't also bore your donors or make them feel like they're throwing money into a hole at a problem that's no closer to getting solved, when like under the surface, you're doing all this great systemic work to build that mass, that critical mass that you need to be able to enact that change. So what are some ways that some of your orgs have talked about your work and growing your work in those interim stages?
I know somebody's got something to share.
Can you repeat the question so I make sure I respond to it?
Yeah, sure. So like in the interim years before you like get that big win, how are you showing the progress? Like how you're getting closer towards your final goal?
Oh, you mean metrics that we used?
Yeah, like data
tools that we-
wise.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah, like, over last year, or how many more children you're reaching, or how closer you are, how much legislation has shifted in those interims. I don't know. I'm so hung up on the Staples Center thing that all I can think is how desperately I want you to come work for me. So I need someone to Google and think in that way. I need to shift thank you. It was a great paradigm shift in my brain. So I'm delighted with just that little nugget from today.
Oh, of course, no worries.
So this is something that we're so right now we are in the process of getting a paid family and medical leave policy passed in New Mexico, but it has been many sessions and a lot of work, and we got the farthest that we've gotten so far, and that's kind of the only number that we can use. And unfortunately, this year it got into a committee, lost by one vote after it had gone through the Senate. Yeah, exactly, Polly. And then now all of our partners are like, oh yeah, we really need to throw more at this. And it's like, right, that could have been done before. So we do expect it to then finally get the momentum that we need, but that's hard to sometimes from our perspective. Like we're so frustrated that, yeah, how do you show that big win when everyone's exhausted and frustrated? But yeah, so that's been kind of a challenge.
I have a question. When you were down to the wire and you just, were one short, were you communicating that out in any public way? Like we're one, signer, we're one yes away, or did you not know until that moment?
Right. So it was in a committee. And fortunately we have been able to contract with a communications team that just has been focused on this. So no one internally, like I haven't had to do that because that would be a lot. But yeah, it was in the room, in a meeting, in a committee meeting, and just like, you're watching it live if you're either in the room or watching it, by webcast. And yeah, then it was just at that moment. I think there, and it's all so political that a lot of, there were a lot of rumors, but you just don't know until you're there. And there was nothing really that we could do at that moment, I don't think.
I'm sort of like thinking, sort of thinking out loud about like what are the opportunities there. So like, I'm curious to hear like what other people do in these situations, but what I've seen some groups do is like, I think the ACLU is one of the groups that like, they use data, they track how many hours they've put into whatever piece of legislation, because they have to for their tracking anyway. And when they finally get something passed, they actually share, it took X many, people hours and X many petition signers and X many emails to go out before we can change this legislation. And then especially if something is moving faster, you could they put it in context and be like, we're moving this faster than ever before, let's keep up the momentum. But they use that like data to tell their people like, this is the investment it's going to take. So in that situation where you've got one more, like you can almost turn that into a selling point. Like if you have the data, you could go back and say, it took us this much time and pressure campaign to change this one person's mind. We're one person away from this success. We need this much investment of time, energy, and funding to just change one more mind. We think, like this is what it's going to take to change one more mind, maybe with like a multiplier, because it's going to be harder to get the last person or something. But I think there are ways to sort of look back at your numbers and try to use them to encourage folks to continue donating, because this is going to be a long fight. Is anyone doing anything like that, or does anyone have a different tactic that they would take for that? Curious.
I mean, again, I don't work in kind of the social services where there's that sense of urgency and real need. So, we wouldn't necessarily use numbers that way. I think just going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think numbers are really important, especially when you're looking for grant support and through foundations and corporate social responsibility. They seem to really love the numbers, right? And I think Polly's right. The story behind the numbers is better for individuals, where the grant funders really, they like the stories too, but they really want to see that growth over time, and they really want to see that they're, investing in what they want to be investing in.
Yeah, I would say you hook them with the story, and especially with foundations and corporations, you sort of like close the deal with the numbers. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, definitely. We're actually going to get into that on the next slide, I think. Yeah, so to your point, funders are starting to frame a lot of decisions around their metrics and what they are receiving information wise. There's been a real development of KPI tracking measures for grantees from institutional funders. And it seems, at least on our end, that we've been noticing that this doesn't seem like a trend that's going to dissipate anytime soon. So I know we just started talking about this, but are you all seeing like your proposals and reporting requirements become more data driven? And how has it been organizing yourself, but also your staff towards being able to provide these answers for you in an easy and timely manner?
I mean, again, I think the funder, they're asking some really hard questions, and, they're asking, how have you helped serve kind of the underserved populations better? They're asking for DEI trends. And how do you, those are really serious questions, and you want to answer them authentically and honestly. And, I've seen too many websites kind of glossing over some of this, and it upsets me reading this stuff. And so I do get concerned about asking, very personal data questions that maybe donors or the nonprofits don't quite have all the answers yet, but they are really important questions to ask. So I don't know if people are struggling with some of those very serious data questions.
Are other folks seeing similar things from their institutional funders?
Yes. This is Trish. Yeah, definitely. We just went through a very data heavy, data driven grant application, and it was, it was like to the point where it was like there was a spreadsheet with like very specific outputs and then milestone numbers, and then how are we going to track this, and it was such a contrast to how we typically think about our work, and also it's so hard to put quantity behind policy and advocacy, so it was definitely a struggle. But I definitely feel this yes, that's been more focused on very hard numbers. Yes.
Got it.
Yeah, and especially these small nonprofits, like, I mean, we only have like a half-time data person, I can't compete with the larger nonprofits that have a development office of, 20, 30, 40 people, right? I mean, it's just, we have we use one of the Blackbaud products, and it's probably a little bit more sophisticated than what we need, but it also helps us with all the point of sales for admissions and events and education programming. So I see why we're using the product, but and we're constantly getting ourselves trained up on how to use the product better, but it's extremely sophisticated, and trying to pull all the data that whether the city is asking us for or foundations are asking us for, sometimes it can be challenging, and your donor database is only as good as what data you put in. Is kind of garbage in is garbage out then, right? And if your database isn't, so I would say our database is not perfect. There's some, we can see that there's some duplicates and some coding errors, and we just don't have enough staff to really help us maybe generate the data that we'd like to be generating.
Yeah, 100%. That's a very big issue that groups that I've worked with in the past are coming across. There'll be grant opportunities, but sometimes the proposals are so difficult and time consuming that it's like, is this even worth applying for? So let's talk about what data is actually important and why. So we kind of touched on this before. So there are like different levels and gradations of data, as far as metrics for your organization, as it relates to your programming and what they speak to. So starting at the bottom are your capacity metrics. So those are task and tactic related goals that speak to the efficiency of your organization. These are things like percentage of people reached, amount of people reached, the bare bones of what we think about when we think about metrics, right? It doesn't really get to the larger issues of like what the problem that we're trying to solve is and our effectiveness to solve it, as far as like our actual impact. This is just at the base level, right? So this is where we were talking about before, some of the hang up of like, are these numbers even useful? Do people care about these numbers? These are normally the numbers that are given that don't really tell that full story. It just tells like the actual tasks that the organization is doing. Still incredibly important, but in context, right? So we don't want to use the wrong metrics to tell the wrong message. The next level up are activity metrics. So these are program related, these are strategy related, these are showing your impact. So this is relating to like a large scale goal, right? So it may be towards a piece of legislation, towards maybe building something, whatever the larger programmatic goals are. This is showing what your organization can do at scale. So these are starting to be like larger level things that you can relay to donors about your impact in the world in your focus area, right? And then the largest version of data are mission and vision related goals. So this is towards the long-term vision of the organization. Every org, it's literally mandated. It's supposed to have a mission. A lot of them have vision statements as well, but they're really abstract. We don't really use them. They're just things that we say like, oh, we want a world where everybody is fed, or everybody has a home, or everybody can be educated, right? What are we doing as an organization that is building that world into like actual fruition, right? Metrics that are framed around this are the most effective in showing what your organization is doing to like literally change the world. And then in the next section, get into like what questions you need to ask yourself and your staff to be able to develop these types of metrics. So starting from the top, your impact measures. First, you need to find your organizational North Star. Where do you want your organization to be in 3 to 5 years? And what world would you have wanted to create through your work? We talked about before being able to think about, we're working in these communities, or we're working on these policies or with other advocacy groups, but we don't want to take credit for that, or we don't know what's ours and what's not. This is a way to like from jump, initiate that thought process. Like, what do we want to be directly responsible for? And what is related to the actions and the impact that we're doing with our programming, and trying to figure that out. And once you get that organizational North Star, we're going to get into our activities. What are the actual programs that we need to run to have that impact? How do we create this new world? Why do we need to create these programs, right? So now we're talking about the problem at large. What is existing in the world that we have come together to work against? And who and how many folks are we going to serve to be able to say that we've had the success that we want to have, as compared to the world we want to build. And then finally, our capacity measures. So like, what are the small steps that our organization is going to take to be able to have this impact? How deep and how wide does our organization need to be to have this impact? So now these are internal metrics, internal KPIs. What programming are we going to have to build? What staff do we need to pull this off? What resources do we need? What does that mean for our budget? All of these things are interrelated, but as I said before, oftentimes the numbers and the words in our organizations don't speak. So this should all be flowing from the North Star of your organization to affect both the external communications about the work that you're doing in Vision, but also the internal programming and supports that you need to enact that. And then developing internally, what does success look like for process and implementation for your programming? This means different things for different organizations, but being able to first map down what's a win for you is going to go a long way in being able to provide quality metrics of being able to measure your success against that win, especially for, like, I know we have some arts groups in here, we have some advocacy groups in here, folks that are working on longer term engagements with certain communities. Learning internally and agreeing upon what that win looks like will help you develop those metrics to be able to say whether you have actually won or not. I think we got a little cut off at the bottom, but we can edit that. And then the last thing is, how do I track all this? Where is all this information coming from? So there is a data cycle that has 4 stages, right? And these are the questions that you have to ask yourself. The first part are these questions that we just went over, data design. What information is actually important? What do I actually care about? And how do I ask those questions? What questions am I asking and why am I asking them, right? Then we're going to get into data collection. How am I going to get the information to answer these questions? Where is this information coming from? Who is this information coming from? How is this information coming? Then it's data storage. So this goes to your databases, your CRMs. Where do I put this information? How do I store this information, right? This is a resource question. Oftentimes, some people, if you are only doing some capacity metrics, maybe you don't need a whole CRM. Maybe a Google spreadsheet that's live will work for those goals. But if you're getting into impact into activity measures, maybe you do need a CRM to be able to measure that, or something a little bit more robust. But you won't know until you understand what you're truly trying to collect and how you want to convey that information, right? The last part is data analysis. How do I use this information? What is this informing? Does this inform your programming going forward? Does this inform your donor base about your effectiveness? Does this inform staffing decisions, budget decisions, right? Again, data is a tool. It's a very neutral thing, right? It's only as useful as whatever you put it to. So you have to decide internally how aligned you want your organization to be towards these goals and what you can use this data for to help inform those goals. Any questions on this section?
Put it back on this one so we can see the sort of the short version of what Kafili just all went through. I'm curious if people feel like they have the capacity or have wrapped their head around the distinctions between these 3 types of metrics. Matrices, but what is the plural? And like, or does any of this feel like hard?
So I would say both. We've had to wrap our minds around this, right? Especially as an advocacy organization, where so much is in service to like the long-term vision of what we're trying to do in terms of the federally funded early care and education system. But it is challenging too, because I think it all goes back to, well, how do you measure impact when it comes to advocacy efforts, right? So it's definitely been a struggle, but I think it's something that we're being forced to do it. So it's had caused some really interesting conversations internally for sure, and amongst our funders as well.
Yeah, again, as a museum, I think capacity and activity metrics are quite easy for us. I think the impact would be the hardest because, our mission is to basically, make sure that we're stewarding the natural and cultural environment here on the Central Coast. So I don't know how you define that, to be quite honest. And that's probably why a lot of people give to us, because they believe in the mission of, preserving the environment, helping to preserve the cultural landscape here. And that's a really hard thing to quantify and qualify.
100%. That definitely can be difficult, especially when it can be abstract. The advice that I've always given groups is a visioning session is always helpful. And so framing like literally the whole spiel about our industry in the most idealistic sense is that none of us should exist. If we are successful at our jobs, we wouldn't have jobs anymore, right? Because the mission would be completed. Right. So what does that world look like where your organization doesn't exist? Right. That's your organization's ideal vision of the world. And then now that you know what that looks like, figuring out how is your organization working towards getting to that point, right? Where you could say, we've done our job. there's no reason for us anymore. Which is hard and abstract and very difficult. There are, folks who can help you with that. I would plug us since we have, those consulting hours where we can help support you outside of this. But that would be my advice for impact metrics, is just thinking deeply about the world that you really want to create and be imaginative about it, not in a way shaped by realism or resources or scarcity, just working in an idealistic sense. And then that'll inform your organizational goals. Great. So we talked a little bit about like some external programming, metrics and statistics, but we want to talk about a case study that we've done with an amazing group, Asian Americans Advancing Justice in Atlanta, who use data to really inform their individual giving. So they really didn't before have very much knowledge about who their donor base was, where they were getting money from. There was no coordination around it. But they had this goal to raise unrestricted revenue to be able to protect the human rights and civil rights of Asian Americans in Georgia through legal services, impact litigation, organizing, and civic engagement. So to the point, I'm sorry, I can't remember who made it earlier about having trouble doing like startup work. This is what we're talking about, being able to utilize data to have an informed donor base and be able to reach out to them so you can get those unrestricted dollars to be able to move in times of, emergency or crisis or rapid response. So the hypothesis of their working relationship with Progressive Multiplier was that if they invested in fundraising tools that enabled them to use the data to effectively target communication solicitations, they would be able to double their individual donor revenue. So what we did in our work with them was move them from a series of spreadsheets and tools that didn't really talk to each other. So to the point made earlier, like garbage data, we weren't using it for anything, to one cohesive CRM that had over 38,000 individual records and create some data hygiene processes around that. So then once all the data was in one place, they were able to segment and analyze, those other steps that we talked about in the data process. So now they have the information stored properly. Now they're analyzing it. They're able to segment their donor list and make qualified asks. Oftentimes, if your donor list doesn't have segmentation, you're making $5 asks from somebody who could give you 500 and $500 asks from somebody who could give you 5, right? So you're making yourself doubly ineffective that way. They were able to develop and test some engagement messaging and solicitation. And the expected outcome was that they would double their revenue through that work. So that's just an example of like internally, even just from a fundraising standpoint, just numbers actually talking to numbers, what we can do. So now that's the financial side of it, along with the programming side of like what tracking different types of metrics and numbers can do for your organization. And then I think our last section, we're going to talk about just some fundraising benchmarks and measures of success from a metric standpoint. So these are the M&R benchmarks. These come out every year. They're top line trends based on 215 nonprofits across the country, various focus areas, sizes, types of organizations, but they usually provide these benchmarks to give out information on how the industry as a whole is looking, right? So some of their top line findings are that the average online revenue decreased by 4% last year, and revenue from one-time online giving decreased by 12%. But revenue from monthly giving, so recurring giving, went up by 11% and accounted for 28% of all online revenue. digital advertising investment by nonprofits increased by 28%. And return on ad spend was highest for search ads. And here are the numbers here, depending on what platform they were on. And for every 100 email subscribers at the beginning of 2022, nonprofits added an average of 9,000. So that's the return rate, around 9% through paid advertising. If we can go to the next slide. Nonprofits sent around 60 emails per email list subscriber, including 29 fundraising appeals. Emails accounted for 14% of all online revenue. I know that's a huge thing with nonprofits. Are we bugging these people? Are we not bugging them enough? How often should we talk to them? When should we talk to them, right? These are numbers of what the industry on average does. For every 1,000 email addresses, nonprofits had an average of 685 Facebook fans, 208 Twitter followers, 160 Instagram followers. Nearly all participants were active on these platforms. Oftentimes people wonder, like, what's my actual social media impact? Like, are these numbers too low? Am I like not getting the right return? TikTok was an active platform for about 30% of participants, and they had an average of 4 TikTok followers for every 1,000 email subscribers. And the majority of nonprofit web traffic came from users on mobile devices, 57%, and 43% came from desktops. However, 75% of the revenue came from users on desktops. So more people visited your site on the phone, but almost, well, 3/4 of the folks who donated actually donated through their laptops or desktop computers, right? Reason why I bring these up, these are conversations that happen in development offices every day, or are asked by EDs and board members every day. You know, but are you as an organization able to measure yourself against these trends, right? This data is incredibly useful data, but it may not be useful to you if you don't know how it relates to your organization. And then the last question is, what do you need to do as an organization to be able to figure out where you fit on these spectrums? Where are you overperforming? Where are you underperforming? And really being able to actually measure your success in quality, quantifiable ways internally. And that's just a little nugget that I leave you with. Sarah, are you saying something, or is that just a little background noise?
Sorry, background noise.
No worries. Yeah, that is the end of the presentation. But would love to hear any thoughts, questions, or comments, anything that we can go back over and do a deep dive on. I know we still have a bit of time.
I guess I just wanted to thank you. I mean, I think those last slides about, you know, you were saying, are we bugging people too much? Are we not connecting with them enough? I mean, we just literally had a conversation about that earlier in the week. And, you know, just watching, you know, what comes in on my email traffic and social media traffic, I'm starting to think that maybe we're not bugging people enough, right? And that we're not promoting our programs enough. And we need to take a look at that. And where is that fine balance between yeah, just hitting the right mark of reminding people that events are coming up, or, you know, we're trying to do May as membership month this month, and how much do we push that to get people to re-sign up? And yeah, I'm starting to rethink that a little bit. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Like 60 email messages a year is more than once a week, right? Granted, like a lot of that is around Giving Tuesday and a year and stuff, but like orgs are in touch with their donor base semi-regularly, you know, but I know that's always been, ever since I worked in development, a point of contention, like how often should we talk to them? Are we annoying them or agitating our donor base? So it's always helpful to know.
Yeah, I feel like I get the question all the time, like, how do I convince my boss that we can solicit more than twice a year, or more than 4 times a year? And I think that these types of numbers are really good to share. And, I know, because I've been in these conversations, people will be like, well, we're not the Red Cross and we're not the this and we're not the that. We're not going to be overly solicitous. And neither are these groups. I mean, I don't know that the Red Cross isn't in this list, but you can look at the M&R benchmark study and see the types of groups that responded, and they really are across the spectrum of like, civic engagement, small groups to, big groups and everything in between. And I also just sort of think it really points to how much engagement matters. So those 60 email messages are, a lot of it is like, let's talk about the latest action that's going on, or an advocacy issue, or progress, impact, just, intermediate impact notes about like what we've done so far, or what this latest thing that happened, how that's affecting our people. All of communications is fundraising, and all of fundraising is communications. And I think that this sort of like points to like, if that's bifurcated, or in some organizations trifurcated, where like there might be a digital, comms, and a fundraising, like really getting groups, those heads together, and looking at things like the M&R benchmark study, I think are really good, because then you can start planning your comms calendar and actually plan out your appeals. You might not win and get, to do 30 appeals, but maybe you can up them to, like 12 or something like that. But just remember, other people, most people, what is it, 5 to 7 organizations that people give to. So they're getting a lot of noise in their inbox. If you're not communicating enough, you're getting drowned out. And then also don't forget, like, what the open rate on emails is, like 25%, the average open rate, which means it takes 4 messages for them to even see one. So of those 60 emails sent, one quarter of those were actually eyeballed. Does it terrify folks to be like, I can't do that many fundraising appeals a year, I'm already too busy?
For the team of 1, come on, man, we got this.
Don't you have like the super fundraiser thing underneath your shirt?
That's right. It's called coffee.
Coffee.
I do think what you're saying about the communications thing is interesting, and it's a challenge, because when you are a smaller organization and some of your cohorts and your communication and marketing is bifurcated and everything is funneled into very specific silos, and it has been the culture for a long time, that idea of, oh my gosh, we received 70 unsubscribed on that last email that went out to 1,500 people. I mean, it's very interesting to see, to figure out, okay, so what are the metrics there that make sense for us? What is the P&L or the ROI on these communication tools that we're using, and for each of our organizations, depending upon the size, how do we adjust that for what makes sense to our organization? And I think that it'd be great if there was a magic formula for whether you have a $100,000 subscriber mailing list, or a 400 subscriber mailing list, to be able to say this percentage is cost effective to see departing, how many of those were clicked on. And I think a lot of the small organizations, what is challenging is having the tools or the human power to sit and analyze all of that. And so picking your top, the top of the food chain in terms of data that you can use and start to calculate today, that's going to be the work for all of us, is to figure out, all right, we got to start somewhere instead of just consistently feeling overwhelmed. So what can we bite off right now? And that's an ongoing conversation. And and it changes, and we have to adjust our sails to the direction the wind blows as needed. And that's this is all really excellent food for thought. So thank you both.
You know, I think that there is a little bit of information about that magic formula out there. We know in digital fundraising, whether you're doing social posts and you're trying to get more engagement, or email fundraising, that there, you know, people argue whether it's 3 to 1 or 4 to 1, but there should be, let's say if you say 4 to 1, there should be 4 information type messages for every one fundraising message. And some folks will argue that the one is a CTA, whether it's fundraising or some other call to action. So, you know, like, and you know, there are interesting things that you can do to make it a teeny bit easier to get to that ratio. And a lot of the databases or communications tools that are being used by lots of folks, like Every Action, stuff like that, are set up to help you. So like you could make every campaign set up in a drip fashion. So there isn't one email sent, but 4. So hopefully every time you do that ask or that message, there's 4 opportunities for that person to touch that level of content. And it doesn't take a lot more effort to set up that drip campaign of 4 messages than it does to create the one, but setting up 4 separate, like, wholly thought out messages independent of themselves is a little bit harder. So I would lean into the technology that's out there to try to help make some of this easier. And then you can also then use the data, like are folks more responding to the first one, the second one, the third one, you know, and what is the diminishing returns? And that way you can save your time by saying, okay, a 4 message drip, you know, doesn't do us any better than a 3, but it saves me a little time to do 3. So I'll do that. Or, you know.
Right. And so this is where that siloing of the communications is making sure that every communication from every department, that holistically development's lens is on all of those, so that we're not sending accidentally, well, whoops, I sent out a reminder email, or well, I have a really the mailing list that I sent is only to half the people and they're not donors. You know, it's like everybody's a donor. Every single communication we have is development. Can we all say it together? Can we all be in agreement? Every single communication we send out is development, because development's about growth. It's not just about fundraising. That I will, that's the end of my TED Talk. Thank you, everyone.
Any other questions or comments?
Just want to say thank you to both of you. This has been such a really good, informative, and engaging session, and a great way to, you know, head into the weekend feeling good. So thank you.
Great. Well, if you enjoyed this session, please join us in 2 weeks where we will be talking about maintaining sustainability through a recession, which is or isn't happening depending on who you listen to and what day of the week it is. So we'll go over all of that. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. Our emails, if you have any follow-up questions, are here on the slide. We would love some feedback. Holly, can you put the link to the feedback form in the chat, please? And yeah, hope to see you at some of our follow-up sessions.
Great, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you both. That was great. I appreciate you.